Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most shocking and powerful moments in recent history, the massive explosion that rocked the Crimean Bridge, the strategic lifeline connecting Russia to the occupied peninsula. What happened on that day didn't just shake concrete and steel, it shook the foundations of Russia's control, confidence, and command in the region. This isn't just a story about an explosion. It's a story about power, pride, and the unraveling of control. The Crimean Bridge, also known as the Kerch Bridge, has always been more than just a piece of infrastructure. To Russia, it was a symbol, a statement to the world that Crimea was theirs permanently. Spanning across the Kerch Strait, it connected mainland Russia with the Crimean Peninsula, standing as both a physical and political link. For years, it carried soldiers, fuel, ammunition, and supplies a vital artery for Russia's ongoing war efforts in southern Ukraine. But in one single thunderous moment, that artery was ripped open. The explosion came without warning. It was early morning, the skies over Crimea painted in pale light, when a massive fireball erupted, sending plumes of smoke and debris spiraling into the air. The shockwave was so strong that people miles away felt the ground tremble. Cars stopped. Alarms went off. And before anyone could understand what had happened, images began flooding across the internet, flames devouring the bridge, steel twisted like ribbons, and a section of the structure completely collapsed into the sea below. In that instant, Russia's symbol of dominance became a symbol of vulnerability. Moscow was quick to respond, calling it an act of terrorism, blaming Ukrainian intelligence forces. But Ukraine remained cryptic, neither confirming nor denying, simply releasing a short, cutting message. The bridge is gone. That was it. A sentence that carried more impact than 1,000 explosions. As the smoke cleared, satellite images began to reveal the extent of the damage. One lane of the road had completely fallen, and train carriages carrying fuel were engulfed in flames. The bridge was designed to withstand natural disasters, not calculated sabotage. This wasn't an accident, it was a message. A message to Russia that even its most guarded infrastructure could be reached, touched, and destroyed. For Russia, the implications were enormous. The Crimean Bridge wasn't just a logistical route, it was a key supply chain feeding the Russian military front in southern Ukraine. With its destruction, the entire flow of military logistics was disrupted. Fuel shortages hit troops, reinforcements slowed down, and panic began to ripple across Russian military channels. Commanders suddenly had to reroute supplies through vulnerable ferry lines and longer land routes under Ukrainian threat. What was once a symbol of invincibility became a glaring weakness overnight. But the real damage wasn't just material, it was psychological. For months, Russian propaganda had painted Crimea as untouchable, protected, secure under Moscow's iron hand. And yet, with one explosion, that illusion shattered. Ordinary Russians watching from home were stunned. If even the Crimean Bridge wasn't safe, what was? Inside the Kremlin, chaos and confusion reigned. Reports emerged of emergency meetings, frantic phone calls, and an atmosphere of quiet panic. Vladimir Putin appeared grim on state television, calling the blast a terrorist attack against Russia itself. Security forces were placed on high alert. The FSB launched sweeping investigations, detaining dozens and pointing fingers in every direction. But no matter how many arrests were made, the damage to Russia's image was irreversible. The explosion also carried deep symbolic weight for Ukraine. For years, Ukrainians had seen the bridge as an insult, a concrete reminder of occupation. To see it burning, collapsing, and broken was more than just military success, it was emotional revenge. Across Ukrainian cities, people celebrated. Fireworks lit the night sky, and social media erupted with memes, songs, and patriotic pride. For them, this wasn't just a bridge falling, it was the beginning of Russia's control falling apart. As experts analyzed the incident, theories emerged. Some suggested it was a truck bomb. Others pointed to maritime drones or underwater sabotage. Each possibility carried its own terrifying implication that Russia's supposedly secure defenses were far weaker than claimed. The attack demonstrated a level of planning and precision that shocked even Western intelligence analysts. It wasn't random, it was strategic. It was psychological warfare at its finest. In response, Russia lashed out. Missile strikes rained down across Ukrainian cities, targeting energy grids and civilian areas in retaliation. It was as if the Kremlin was trying to prove it still had teeth, still had power, but the message that the world heard was different. Russia was losing control. The bridge explosion exposed cracks not only in its infrastructure, but in its leadership, its military command, and its confidence. Economically, the impact was devastating. The bridge had been a critical route for commercial transport and tourism between Russia and Crimea. With it damaged, trade slowed, and the peninsula faced isolation. Prices in Crimea began to climb. Fuel shortages hit gas stations. Supplies ran thin. The sense of security that Russian citizens once felt started to fade, replaced by anxiety and doubt. Internationally, the explosion was a turning point. Western analysts described it as one of the most significant blows to Russian prestige since the start of the war. Allies of Ukraine saw it as proof that Moscow's power could be challenged and that the seemingly impossible could be achieved. In diplomatic circles, whispers grew louder. Perhaps Russia's hold on Crimea wasn't as unshakable as it seemed. As the days turned into weeks, satellite photos showed the bridge partially repaired, but the scars remained visible. The Russian government proudly announced that traffic had resumed, but everyone knew the fear had already settled in. The psychological victory for Ukraine was complete. Every soldier, every civilian, every leader in Moscow now knew the bridge could be hit again. The explosion also had a ripple effect across Russian politics. Critics of the war began to speak louder, questioning how such an important structure could have been left so vulnerable. Pro-war hardliners, on the other hand, called for harsher retaliation, pushing Putin to escalate further. Inside the Kremlin's inner circle, divisions deepened. The sense of absolute control that Putin once commanded began to fracture. For the Russian military, the event became a nightmare scenario. Supplies had to be rerouted, convoys became targets, and logistics turned chaotic. Every shipment now carried a shadow of fear. Every crossing of the Kerch Strait reminded soldiers that even the mightiest infrastructure could be reduced to rubble. And as winter approached, the timing couldn't have been worse. The loss of easy supply routes meant troops on the front line faced shortages just as conditions grew harsher. Ukraine's morale, however, soared. The bridge explosion became a rallying cry, proof that no Russian stronghold was beyond reach. On social media, images of the explosion became iconic. The massive fireball against the backdrop of the sea, the broken rail tracks, the burning fuel cars all captured the collapse of an empire's illusion. For Ukrainians, it was hope. For Russians, it was humiliation. For the rest of the world, it was a warning of how fragile the balance of power had become. The bridge's destruction also sent a signal far beyond the battlefield. To the international community, it symbolized the decay of Russian control over occupied territories. Nations began to question how long Russia could truly hold Crimea if it couldn't even protect its main connection to it. Even inside Russia, whispers of dissatisfaction began to grow louder. As time went on, attempts to rebuild and repair the bridge couldn't erase what had happened. The explosion had already entered history as a defining moment of the conflict, a moment when symbolism outweighed steel. A moment when control slipped through Russia's fingers. Every explosion carries both sound and silence. The sound was heard that morning across Crimea, a thunderous roar that echoed for miles. But the silence afterward was even louder, the silence of shock, disbelief, and the realization that something fundamental had changed. The world watched as Russia tried to regain its composure, but the psychological damage was permanent. Once a nation begins to fear its own vulnerability, it never fully recovers, and for Russia, that vulnerability was now laid bare for all to see. Ukraine, meanwhile, used the moment to strengthen its alliances and boost morale. International aid and military support increased, inspired by what many saw as a turning point. The bridge explosion became proof that resistance could defy aggression. For Putin, however, the incident was a personal blow. The bridge had been one of his proudest projects. He had personally driven across it during its grand opening, calling it a symbol of Russian unity. To see it shattered was to see his image cracked. His silence afterwards spoke volumes. Behind closed doors, officials whispered that the president's temper was explosive, that blame was being passed around like a grenade. In the end, the explosion wasn't just an attack on a structure, it was an attack on an empire's illusion. It showed that no matter how tightly a nation tries to hold onto power, control can crumble in seconds. The bridge's collapse was a mirror reflecting the state of Russia's war, unstable, uncertain, and increasingly desperate. Today, the remnants of that explosion still echo. The bridge has been repaired, traffic has resumed, and Russian state media claims everything is normal. But deep down, everyone knows it's not. Every truck that crosses it, every soldier who drives over those repaired lanes, feels the weight of what happened, the fear that it could happen again. This wasn't just the destruction of steel and stone, it was the unraveling of certainty. The Crimean Bridge explosion was a reminder that even the most powerful nations can lose control in a single moment, and once control is lost, it never truly returns. Russia's grip on Crimea has never been the same since. The explosion sent a message written in fire, a message the world will never forget. And as the war continues, one truth remains unshakable. Control, once shattered, cannot be rebuilt with concrete alone. The bridge stands again today, but its shadow tells a different story, one of defiance, of resistance, and of the cracks in an empire's armor. What began as an engineering marvel has become a monument to the fragility of power. The explosion over the Kerch Strait was more than a military strike. It was history unfolding in real time. It was the sound of change, the spark of resistance, and the beginning of an end that Russia could no longer deny. And as the waves beneath the bridge continue to flow, carrying with them the echoes of that fiery morning, one message rings clear. No bridge, no wall, no empire can stand forever against the tide of truth. Thank you for watching till the end. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the world's most powerful and defining moments. Until next time, stay aware, stay informed, and remember, history is written not by those who build bridges, but by those who dare to cross them.